it's taking something that you know it's going to be hard and going for it. Obviously, that's kind of superficial. It's just like, yeah, just go for it. But it's actually settling into the journey behind that and really defining what is your why. Why are you doing this? But also, it's if it's a long-term goal, you can't get just fixated on the summit. You have to settle and enjoy the journey, and you have to come to terms with the fact that it is going to be hard. I love doing cold plunges. When I get in at first sometimes and my mind's not right, once I come to grips with the fact that, yes, it's going to be cold, but so what? It's the same sort of mentality with like a big goal or a dream that you're putting off. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, you're going to have to work for it. Well, so what? Like, come to terms with it and go for it. Like, what do you have to lose?
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson, and this is the All Well Co podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space.
Hey, John, and welcome to the All Well Co podcast. And before we dive into your pretty interesting journey, let's kind of just set the stage and just ask the question. So how did you meet us? How did you meet the All Well Co community?
So I have a mutual friend, I believe, and she lives here in the Vail Valley, and her name's Haley. She does some sort of coaching mindset with people, and then she connected me with you guys, and it just seemed like the sort of the right fit to talk with you about adventure, right? Adventure and mindset, and what drives people, the why, I think, with a lot of things in life. And of course, my why is geared towards big objectives and big goals, but helping others with those big goals. And then that's how we got connected.
Yeah, cool. I'm quite excited about this one too, because we had, if you've ever come across Hannah McKen, she is a polar expedition, and she held the Guinness World Record for going solo across Antarctica she did it in 39 days for men and women. So we had her on a few episodes ago. So it'd be really nice to talk about Everest and chat about what you get up to as well. So you grew up in Vail. You're actually in Vail now when we do this. So you got nature as your background. Was there any specific moment when you were growing up that you realized that, you were going to be a mountaineer, you were going to get into adventure, and this was going to be your life's work?
I mean, I think I had to figure it out later. However, I knew that I went to Red Sandstone Elementary School in Vail, Colorado, which is like right across the highway from the ski area. And at that time, the schools were so small here and the town was so small. There was, hardly anybody lived here. So we had maybe 25 kids in our class, like our second grade class, third grade class, whatever. And so that at that time, that school was the only school, elementary school, and then there was one middle school, and then there was one high school in this end of the valley. It wasn't like it is now where there's like multiple schools. There's, Vail and Ski and Snowboard Academy. There's ski club. There's all these clubs that promote skiing for kids. Back then, it was just our elementary school. I'm not that old, but it was the only school. So you went to the school, and then in January, February, and March, every Friday there was Learn to Ski. Now they just do like a Learn to Ski week. Back then, they let us ski every Friday. So we would get to our homeroom class, like turn in our homework. There'd be announcements, and then at 8:30, we'd walk over and get on the chairlift, and we'd be grouped with an instructor, the ski instructors, and every Friday we'd get a ski. And I feel
really bad for you.
Yeah.
For schooling.
It's a way to grow up.
So it's part of life. And in my elementary school class, I remember specifically I had Toby Dawson and Sarah Schlepper, who have gone on to ski in multiple Olympics. I skied with them consistently all the time. I loved skiing as a young kid, but I was sort of built differently. Like I had the opportunity at a young age to hike with my mom and dad and with friends. And then at one point as an 8-year-old kid, I was taken up on Mount of the Holy Cross, which is a mountain you see from the top of Vail Mountain. And when you get to the summit of that mountain, you can, on a clear day, you can see all 6 other major Colorado mountain ranges from the top of that mountain. And when you're on the top, you're just like, wow, this is incredible. Like there's all these other mountains. Like what's possible? I would love to hike all of those. And then in school, as a grade school kid, you could walk into any grade school and talk to kids and ask them like, what's the highest mountain in the world? And they learn what it is at a young age. It's Mount Everest. And so I had this sort of idea, like dreaming about maybe someday I would climb Mount Everest, but obviously at that age, you had no clue how I would ever get there, or even what it was like to go to Nepal or anything. But I just kind of had that dream. And then it kind of moved forward from that into high school, where I played college basketball eventually, but I had to choose one sport. I played hockey, I skied, and I played basketball. Well, they're all in the same season.
Mm.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
I got into high school and I kind of decided I wanted to play basketball. It was kind of this cool sport that was different. I'm from a mountain town. Nobody played basketball. Everyone thought you should ski, you should do these other things. And even though I skied for fun on weekends and had fun with those sports, I gravitated to basketball. But I found that becoming a skier and a mountaineer, I got back to my practices, my seasons as a football and basketball player, and I was so strong from the acclimatization, from the mental toughness, the grit, all the things that goes along with hiking mountains. When I was 15 years old, my mom gave me the learner's permit to the car. When I had my permit, she gave me the car, and I would drive to trailheads, and I would hike up drainages and then eventually find my way up on the top of 14ers. And the first summer I was 15 years old, I climbed 23 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado, most of them by
Wow.
myself. And I had a guidebook, but back then these guidebooks just said, like, here's the trailhead. Okay, take this drainage up, follow that ridge, and see on the summit. Like, it wasn't like now where there's all this online information. There's
Yeah.
all trails, or there's maps that tell you where to go. Like, you had to study, you had to figure it out. And I even think I pretended in learning the history of the first early surveyors in Colorado that, like, I sort of felt like one of those guys, like exploring and figuring it out. And if I was by myself, sometimes my mom would say, take the dog. We had this German Shepherd dog named Rennie, and she would come with me and we'd hike together. And then if the mountains got a little too challenging for her, my mom would tell me, hey, take your brother, take your little brother. And so I have, images of us, me and my brother, up on Capitol Peak's knife edge when we were teenagers, trying to figure out how to summit the most dangerous 14er in Colorado. And actually I have a shot of me when I was in high school right here. That
very
is
cool.
like on that knife edge ridge, which is insane. But we just had to figure it out. And that's how I got into mountaineering and hiking. And then I had some mentors at some different summer camps where we did learn a little bit about ropes and how to rappel down things. And so it was all kind of self-taught at an early age. And that's how I got into wanting to become a mountaineer. I even remember carrying, before we had all this really good AT backcountry gear, sticking my heavy Nordica boots in my big backpack for backpacking trips and carrying that up and strapping my skis on and hiking up to the top of Mount Elbert. And on a warm March day, similar to what we've had this week before these storms, transitioning out of my hiking boots into my ski boots and clicking into skis and skiing down Mount Elbert at the age of 17. And so that got me into, like, well, you can ski down these mountains. Like, this is crazy, and this is back in like the late 90s, nobody was back there. And it was just something that piqued my interest. And so as I went on to go to like grad school and, college and then grad school after that, I just started having this dream to manifest a way that I could have a career that I could be outside most of the time.
Yeah. So I want to get a little bit deeper into your background in that environmental geography. I think that, we're talking about school now. How did that shape the way that you approach mountains and extreme environments? Because, we didn't have the maps, we didn't have anything like that back then, as you're saying. How did all of that approach the way you do things?
Well, like, getting an education was always my first goal, right? So I was a undergrad student, and then I got a graduate scholarship to do my master's degree in geography, weather, and climate. And then, I would get these old topo maps out and read them to figure out how to go up these mountains and stuff. And then that allowed me to go work as an intern as well in grad school as a climbing ranger for 2 summers at Mount Rainier National Park and at Glacier National Park. And then every chance that I got when I was in grad school, I worked 3 jobs so that all the money I set aside, literally when school got out, I'd jump on a plane and go travel somewhere new and go climb a mountain somewhere. So I started small with like going to, Pico de Orizaba and in Mexico, climbing a volcano there. I went to Denali, skied down Denali. I went to Aconcagua. And then I had my first trip to Nepal in 2008 during grad school. I actually got to present a paper that was part of my research about ways that we could work on the permit system on Mount Everest. And I used frameworks from being a climbing ranger at Mount Rainier with their permit system and applied some of those principles to Everest and like what the permit system should be there at this conference. And that gave me a chance to go to Nepal. And I had an all expense paid trip to Nepal. And when I got to Nepal in 2008, I had this conference over like the first weekend, but I took the second week of spring break off. So I had like 9 days left after this conference, and I booked a plane flight, flew to Lukla, and then I trekked to base camp in 4 days. And usually that's half the time it takes to trek there now, because most people need to acclimate. But I mean, I grew up climbing and hiking mountains in Colorado, so I was already pretty acclimated to 14,000 feet. And when I got to see Everest for the first time on my own, just figuring it out, I just knew that like that was the first step into eventually going back.
Yeah.
And so every trip that I took during grad school, I would spend money and go to places. But when I was in those places, I had this dream of like, well, maybe someday I can take people here. And so I learned, what permit systems were with local agencies. I learned how to contact companies locally to help me run my logistics. I developed friendships and relationships with guys in all these countries. And now, long story short, my company, we basically run programs on all 7 continents now. And a lot of it was from the groundwork I laid back then, even though I didn't even know how to get clients back then. And so even in my early career, about going on 15 years ago, I took people to Aconcagua in 2010 to climb myself, but I took some people and I lost money on it. 2014, I took people to Aconcagua and Kilimanjaro that same year, groups of people, but budgeting wise, I was terrible and I lost money on that. So like I took a lot of knocks early on to figure out how to run a successful, like sort of boutique high-end guiding company, but also how to become an entrepreneur in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So we'll get into a lot of that, which is exciting. And Everest too, we're going to get into that shortly. But before we move on, Colorado, just local to us here. I think you spent the night on all 55 of the 14ers we have here.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the hardest night you had, and what did you learn from it? Because some of these I wouldn't touch.
Yeah. Can I just explain something first, though? So let's explain, because we're going to have some overseas people. So 14,000 feet is what in meters again, John?
About 4,200 meters.
Yeah. Okay. So there's 55 feet of those mountains here, and it's a big deal.
Colorado.
It's a big deal here to climb all 55. I just want to put a bit of context there for people who are not from Colorado. So crack on. Sorry, Lauren.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So some people take years. I actually finished them all in high school. So back when I turned like 18, I had them all done that summer for the first time. So in that first experience doing them all, had some challenges, and I'd gone back to some multiple times, failing on storms and just learning about the terrain. So then I fast forwarded to 2002. I had maybe done another lap on all of them. I had skied some of them. 2005, I did my master's thesis on the Colorado 14ers. And that was a trail and route assessment project in partnership with the American Alpine Club and the Colorado 14ers Initiative. And that was just a study that allowed people to learn about like which mountains are getting the most impact from a trails perspective, which mountains are having the most people climb them, what's the frequency of climbing these peaks. And those sort of trail management orgs used a lot of the data to help them decide which trails to go fix and to go build now. Because back then, in the late 90s, there was only a trail on maybe a quarter of the 14ers, an actual trail to the summit. A lot of even the easier ones didn't even have trails. And so they built trails, which is a good thing, because since the 90s, Colorado's grown by 4 million residents. And so the impacts are great. And so those orgs use some of my data as well as their own projects to build trails on some of these peaks. And so after sort of a decade's worth of learning about the mountains through all these projects, I became a college professor. I thought that was my calling, in which I still kind of have my hands in work with Colorado Mountain College and study abroad. But basically, I had a 1-year position at Central Washington University in 2010, Department of Geography, teaching courses there. And I got done with that year, and then they did not renew my contract for a second year. And this is 2010. And the year before that, I went and climbed and skied Denali for the first time on an expedition. For preparing for some of these bigger mountains overseas, I found that if I slept up on a 14er summit, so I would hike up and pick some of them and sleep on them, it allowed my body to acclimate more. And I felt really strong, producing red blood cells and being up in the elements. You learn how to use your hands when it's cold, setting up a tent, dealing with weather, like all the things, carrying a heavy pack up at altitude. All these things make you super strong for bigger mountains that are twice as high as what we have here, or 20,000 feet. So in the summer, actually it was March of 2009, in the winter still, I slept on the summit of Elbert with my dear friend Chris Tomer, who's a weatherman. And we went to college together. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we're laying up at the top of this, and the start of this book actually sort of goes back to that moment, because we're laying in this tent, and then it was a calm sunset. We go to bed, and at about 2 a.m. we're waking up by 60-mile-per-hour winds, and we're just getting blasted up there. And one of the tent poles breaks, and we're holding the tent down, and we barely get any sleep, and it calms down by the morning for somehow. But as we're sitting up there, I just kind of looked at Chris, and I'm like, yeah, this is crazy, but you know what? It'd be kind of cool, like, and for some of our listeners, or for you guys, if you've hiked a 14er, you get to a summit and you see that there's like a big rock shelter up there, right? And most of these, you're like, oh, you could probably fit a tent right there. Like, there's a windbreaker, you could build a wall. And so I was just curious of like, well, maybe it's possible to spend the night on all of them. Maybe I could put a tent on almost all of them. And I had shared that in the moment. Imagine us laying in this tent at the top of Mount Elbert, tent poles are breaking, and I'm telling Chris this, and he's just like, you're nuts. But he's like, that's an amazing idea. But then he goes, when would you ever have time? You would have to lose your job in order to go and do this. And so flash forward to like a year and a half later, I called Chris up after I was not renewed with my contract at Central Washington University. And it was early June. And I go, hey man, guess what? I just lost my job, and I don't have a job. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to create my own job. And it seemed outrageous at the time, but he was like, okay, I'll come and join you on some of these, and on others, I'll help you with weather forecasting and sending you updates. And it'll be your decision when you're up there if I tell you that the weather's coming in to get out of the way. But like, it was really great to have his, teamwork and helping me. And back then, even after 3 or 4 different laps around the 14ers over a 10-year period, I could go up on a summit now, and especially now the cell coverages are better on these peaks. But back then I'd be like, well, hey, if you go stand over there by that rock, you're going to get cell coverage. Or, hey, if you go stand over on that ridge, you're going to get, like, I knew all this from all my experience up there. So he would send me updates. Even if I didn't have service, I'd get up there, pop in on my cell phone. This is 2011. And he'd say, well, yeah, there's a storm coming to your southwest to look out for. It's probably not going to hit you. You can probably stay up there. Or he'd say, hey, there's a storm coming. You should probably get out of the way. And so I would go up, time it. I knew how long it would take for me to get to the summit. I would hike up, 4 p.m. If the sunset was at 8 p.m. and I knew I could do the summit in 3 hours, I'd leave at 4 p.m. to minimize my time in the danger zone, especially if there were storms that summer. And I started hiking, and I'd get to a summit, set up my tent, shoot the sunset photos, and go to bed. And then I'd wake up in the morning, maybe eat a light breakfast or a snack or something that I brought with some water. And then I'd just hike back down, go to the trailhead. At the time, I was writing a blog and a journal, posted blog online, because there was no social media back then. I think there was a little bit of Facebook, but there was no Instagram. And so I just would update my website, and people started following it. And suddenly I was like, you know what? I think I could try to do all these in one summer. Like, I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I don't have a job. So, so it was just that vision of taking a chance and going for it. And, that got me going that summer, and I started climbing and hiking all of them and putting it all together. And eventually, I made it through in 95 days with a lot of failures, a lot of interesting moments. Near the end, my tent got struck by lightning at one point, but I got out of the way in the nick of time. Poles got melted together. The tent got holes in it, and but I survived, and I got out of the way and was able to move on and finish the project.
That's very cool. Well, you're already starting to intrigue me, because I'm sure there are lots of mental and physical challenges that you go through when you do this, but you guide people, you take people on high altitude climbing. What do people generally underestimate when they, are thinking about this sort of high altitude climbing?
I think for projects on bigger mountains, it's really about the commitment level that people can do. And then the amount of work they need to put in, both skill wise and fitness wise, and then the mental side. I think it's 3 aspects. And if they put the work in those 3 aspects through training, either training with me or on their own, or most of the clients that I've had the most success with train with me too, leading up to it, then they're able to actually really enjoy the experience. And then it becomes, their why comes out even more deeply in terms of what it means to them while they're doing it, and then after they're done doing it. And I think both of my recent one-on-one clients, 2021 and 2024, were really a testament to that, because both of these guys are my dearest friends in life because of what they accomplished, but because I was there for them, and then they put the work in. And they've used that to inspire others, their own journey.
So in terms of underestimation, they don't understand how much work it is. That would be the mistake that people could make.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think in this world of social media, especially with how cool things look online, everyone thinks they can just do anything to get the photo. And in reality, like, I see people that show up at Everest sometimes and just shake my head about their fitness level, their skill level, especially getting worse now on, fortunately, most of my summits have never been crowded because we always just go later in the season and then we wait. And then we go at the end of the season after people are off the mountain and we have no crowds virtually. And that allows me to shorten the time that you have to be on Mount Everest on an expedition. We shorten it to anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks now. It doesn't have to take 8 weeks anymore to be there. It's easier on your body and the climb is much safer that way. And we wait till after, and the weather's usually warmer and better anyway after people leave. So, there's kind of a combination of the style that we do it in and the way we teach it. And then it's a very niche job now, obviously. So I could probably name on my hand 2 or 3 other guys that only do one-on-one Everest guiding. There's a lot of guides and companies that will guide a group and they'll take the group there and then they'll get each person maybe a Sherpa. They'll have several Western guides or certified guides leading people, but the group has to kind of stay together. There's group dynamics. That costs a certain amount in Everest. But if you do a one-on-one custom adventure, there's 2 or 3 other guys in our industry that do it like I do it. And it's a lot. It's very expensive, but it also leads to a lot of good results.
Yeah, a lot of unique experiences. So obviously you've summited Everest multiple times. What was the most unexpected lesson you learned on that mountain?
I mean, I think it's just to never let your guard down. In a lot of times you can get this false sense of security. Like, yeah, there's ropes put in, there's ice fall that's built in, and that there's ladders that are maintained by an org there called the Icefall Doctors. The teams come together and designate Sherpas to fix the rope to the summit. You can get there and have this false sense of security, and so some people can let their guard down. Even something as simple as not covering up your face, not putting enough sunscreen on, eating the wrong foods, not hydrating enough, and then going up and really paying attention to storms and situations. There could be a quick storm that moves in and blows you off the mountain, and it's sometimes hard to avoid those windows or get tempted to go up too early in the season now, when statistically we've seen that later between the 20th and 26th of May is usually the best time to summit the mountain. And some years, because it's a business now so much, a lot of the locals, they want to get paid. So they get the ropes in quick as they can to the summit, these incredibly strong Sherpa teams. And as soon as everyone thinks the ropes are in, well, hey, it's safe to go up there. And most of the years, our deaths are happening between about the 10th and the 20th when people try to go up in a windy weather window, assuming the weather's going to be good. And I think patience is a virtue, and on Everest and in life, I think patience is probably the most powerful attribute in life that we take for granted, because humans aren't generally patient. We're in an instant gratification society, especially in America, especially in the Western world. And, you have to sometimes sit there and wait for a week or 9 days or 10 days. And you have to be patient. You have to know that the weather is going to get better. Some people have a scarcity mindset when they're there, and that's the wrong way to approach Everest. They think, oh, well, if there's not a summit window in the next few days, it's never going to be one. And we're all, we're going to miss our chance. And then all the groups go up. There's a big line. People die. There's bad weather. Like, what we watch it almost every year. And I think the biggest value is learning how to be patient and how to waste time and just sit around. It's like the strongest attribute I tell people. They're like, what do I need to know if I want to climb Everest? I'm like, well, yeah, there's fitness involved. There's some travel involved. There's some being on the mountain and some climbing skill, but I think you have to know how to be patient and know how to be good at sitting around.
And know that Mother Nature is always in charge, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, so you were on Everest in 2015 during the earthquake. Can you walk us through what that day was like? That sounds wild.
Yeah, I went on an Everest Lhotse permit. That was only my second expedition to Everest at the time. I was going there as an independent climber with one of my friends who was guiding a group of clients, and I was able to just use their permit. And then I was going to be kind of autonomous on my own, like going up and climbing. And we got to base camp, hung out for a couple rest days. We're getting ready the next day to go up, like having our last rest day in base camp, getting ready to go up the ice fall. And lunchtime kind of came. We were sitting in the dining tent, and shaking began, and it felt like we were on a boat on this glacier for like 2 minutes.
Mm.
And after the shaking stopped, it was like, whoa, that was one of the biggest earthquakes I'll probably ever experience in my life. And then there was this rumbling, and it was sort of foggy that day, so you couldn't see into the valley that good, and you couldn't see the peaks above us. And above base camp, opposite of Everest, this 3-mile long ridge of ridgeline, it collapsed. All the ice seracs and chunks the size of semi trucks and football stadiums came down and accelerated in speed down this slope for 4,000 feet and hit this bowl that was next to the glacier. And when it hit this bowl, the energy had to explode out somewhere. So it exploded out in the form of like a sonic wave air blast.
Ooh.
And that air blast came across and hit people like a bomb. So it wasn't, a lot of people think avalanche. Well, in Nepal, avalanches are generally big ice blocks and there's snow in it, but not a ton of snow. It's a very dry thing where they're big ice chunks that come down and hit you, and that can be catastrophic. And so the area was powder blasted, and the bomb hit, and like people got picked up and tossed hundreds of yards. Tents were destroyed and exploded. There was projectiles. Like it was more like a tornado or a hurricane effect that you see. And walking through that disaster zone, we were above the zone a little bit with our base camp because of where we pitched the camp. So we got kind of lightly dusted by some of the powder that was pushed out, but it wasn't a big deal. It was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, hey, let's go down and see what's going on down there. It looks kind of weird. And we walked down in there and people were dead. And you were like, oh, this is awful, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously extreme adventures push people to their limits. Was that a moment for you that you were like, well, clearly in the area you were in, you were fine, but have you had a moment that you were like, well, this might be it, you know, this might be my last day? Have you ever experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately not on Everest. I mean, that day was that experience, and I'll tell you about a couple other ones, but that Everest experience of the earthquake though was a significant point in my life that changed my life, because yeah, we're watching, it was like, okay, this is weird. I'm carrying dead people to the helipads. Why didn't it hit us? Why am I still here?
Yeah.
And then I stayed and helped with some earthquake data through the U.S. Geological Survey, because at the time I was, you know, a doctoral. I had a doctorate and I was working as an active professor. I had former students of mine that were working for the USGS. They reached out to me. I collected some earthquake data, and then I work with a org now, a couple different orgs doing recovery work there still consistently. So that changed my life in those directions. But the most significant change in my life and how I treat my everyday life, how I go about my business, how I wake up, and just my attitude every day, and how I live life for a living, basically, and my zest for life comes from the fact that when I got home from the earthquake experience 2 weeks later or so, I got home, my mom and dad picked me up from the airport. They hugged me. My dad put his arm around me. My mom was there. And my dad says, hey, we love you. Like, it just wasn't your time. And then he looked at me and he goes, well, what are you going to do with this now? It wasn't like, oh, well, such a bad story, such a sad thing that happened to you. It was more like, all right, this is a new opportunity. Like, what are you going to do with your life now that you weren't killed? This is awesome. Like, so it was like that goes into the whole, sort of framework of the Everest-Ready mindset, is like, so many of us do overcome and or have awful things happen to us. And I think how we respond can be really significant in our lives. Yes, it's okay to acknowledge trauma, and it's okay to acknowledge heartbreak or setbacks or pain. But I think it's better to try to rise above it and see it as an opportunity, and not playing the victim. I think that's the most significant thing that happened to me with the earthquake experience. But that changed my life, because when I look back in the last 10 years of all the amazing life I've gotten to live in 10 years, I had so many more things in me, right? I wasn't meant to die that day. I was meant to come back out and write 3 more books and, get hired to do speeches and inspire other people and to coach clients and to teach people and to live a life of outdoors and being in love and just all the things that make life grand, right? So that changed my life. And I wouldn't say I don't have bad days, because we all have bad days. And I'm sure people that watch this could be struggling with something in life, but I think it's how do you respond to those things that ultimately shapes you?
Well, that's what I was going to dive into here, because I know you coach people on what you call the Everest-Ready mindset, and you just mentioned it. But for everyone who's listening, they've got everyday challenges. They're running their business. They've got some sort of personal adversity. How does the Everest-Ready mindset translate into their everyday life? So not just about being on a mountain.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to those sort of things I talked about with the struggles or suffering. Like, okay, yeah, that day on Everest was awful. Like, it was like gloomy. We're powder blasted. We didn't even know if we could get home. It felt like a doomsday scenario. It was a suffering situation. I think in real life, there's people that have real life suffering situations financially, health wise. I think those are the 2 biggest ones. And then, of course, within the family, like, everybody has families that could pull at your time or even just struggles within the family situation. But also, most of the time, realize that these little storms in life, just like storms on the mountain, are going to end at some point, and they're not going to last forever. And so if you just hang in there, and if you approach it with a positive attitude and with a constructive attitude and with sort of this flipping the switch on just, okay, having a down day, like I'm just going to let life get me as opposed to like, I'm going to get at life, then I think that's the essence of it, is like find a different way to approach a situation, because it still can be solved. And if it's really hard and difficult and challenging, more than likely it's, if you have a positive attitude about it, it's going to pass and you're going to get through it.
Okay. So do you have any kind of habits or mental exercises you practice daily to stay prepared for these extreme situations?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely take time for myself, meaning like this morning, I had to meet some friends, clients to ski, but we met at like 9:00. I get up early enough to go get a good workout in. I do some meditation usually on a daily basis in the morning. If I can, I'll mix that in with things like breath work or cold plunge or sauna, or kind of a variety of those things. And if it's not those things that are kind of mellow in the morning to get me going, I'll go get a light workout in or something. And then if I have to ski after that. So I think it's about self-care ultimately, that then allows you to find that right headspace and to, obviously take time for yourself, because we're all humans that are in high demand, right? Like high demand could be related to a career, or it could be related to like your family needs you. But how often do you get to take time for yourself? Even if you're a busy father, busy mother, busy with 3 kids, and even if it's taking 10 minutes for yourself so that you can center and find yourself where you need to be and pick out your best attitude, your best self. And I think that's probably the most important sort of priority thing that I make sure I do every day.
Yeah. So I want to go back for a second. Have you had any near close calls? I mean, I know we talked about how you changed your mindset after that one that you made it through, but have you had any others?
Well, a year later, I was skiing. So I went from doing all the 14ers and sleeping on the summit situation to then raising the bar and attempting to ski all the 14ers in the same season. And that was in 2016. And because of the sort of schedule surrounding that, April, May, and June are kind of our best months in Colorado, which are coming up to ski down peaks, because the snow will start to stick more. The winds die down. The winds aren't as bad. And last week I was just up on Yale and Princeton training and doing some climbing and hiking some of the peaks in the winter. And you couldn't even ski down them because they were too wind blown. But I was able to go and do a project where, I did most of them in March, April, May, and June. But I had to ski some of them on the earlier side of the schedule when the peak wasn't in the greatest condition snow wise. And so I was skiing down a mountain called Little Bear, and I scraped my ski on sort of an ice patch in this couloir and tumbled about 500 feet down a couloir. And it got really narrow to a spot where there's like a big rocky side of it. Somehow I bounced left and around the rocks and I didn't hit them. I had a helmet on. And then where the snow had avalanched from a previous event, I landed in feet first in this apron of snow. And then I was fine, but I thought when I got up, my arm hurt like heck. It was bleeding. I thought I broke my arm, but it really just got scraped up. And then I was able to ski out under my own power and go get an x-ray. And when I tumbled that far, I mean, I thought that was it, it was crazy. But when I got checked out at the hospital, there was nothing broken. I just got beat up. The next morning when I woke up and took like a couple of days off, I felt like I just got hit by a truck. Like I felt like in high school, I played football my junior and senior year of high school. And we had a small school. So I had games where I was sort of like Travis Hunter playing like offense and defense, like all game, and you just get beat up. I felt like that. Like I just got beat up after like a big game. And I eventually healed up from that and continued on and finished the ski project. But that was probably my closest call to death. I mean, I was on the K2 winter expedition in 2021 when we put 10 Sherpas on the summit in Nepal, because I was supporting a friend of mine who was trying to climb the mountain. But once it got a little too epic, meaning too cold and the conditions weren't right, I just opted to stay in base camp on the radio. But on that same summit push that people did continue to go up, because I thought it was not safe to go, 5 people died. So, I wouldn't say I was close to death because I made the smart decision just to stay down. I thought this is stupid to go up. But that was kind of an expedition you look back on and say, man, that got bad really quick.
Yeah. That's actually something I want to ask you about. So you've been in situations like this where you either shouldn't go or you should turn back. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, self-awareness, the way you frame things, and just understanding what the entire picture is. So all of it is crucial. How do you help other people recognize when to push and when to pull back? I mean, company aside.
Especially when someone's paid a lot of money.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I try to teach them those values early on in a trip.
Yeah.
I don't ever manifest failure, but I think a good example is like if the weather gets really bad, even if you're climbing a 14er, and if we're practicing the principles of starting early and picking a better weather day and things like that, then I've rarely had to turn a client around. And then if I train them hard, I've rarely had to turn the client around. So it's actually more about the actual summit day or summit window and picking a good window. And now with our forecasting, to be honest, we're pretty darn good at it. There's rarely a time we go part way up and we're like, oh my God, it's getting epic now. This wasn't in the forecast. Like most of the time we can see these big weather windows on the bigger mountains. And so, I mean, 4 years in a row now, I've taken clients to Aconcagua in Argentina, and we summit them every time. But we prepare them earlier and know that like if their fitness isn't good, we can yank them back. I've had a few scenarios on smaller peaks where I've had to turn somebody around. Usually they don't get upset at all. They kind of know from the beginning I'm conservative. Fortunately, on the bigger mountains, I haven't had to do that for somebody and just say, hey, you can't go, you can't make it, you can't do it. When it does happen and I've had to turn people around because of a bad weather day or make them wait, though, they listen to me. I think they respect that and stuff. I think the authenticity of my company and how we do things, we're very clear with the clients before trips, but like people sign up with me because I've been conservative on trips before and have 100% safety record in terms of like no one's died on my watch type of thing, And so obviously I'm proud of that and I want to continue that, but obviously I know I'm not invincible either to those things. I mean, those things can happen to anybody. So yeah, we just try to talk about those things even before we're on the mountain.
Yeah.
That sometimes the weather can get really bad and like, hey, if we have to wait, you got to wait. You have to be patient. If you're patient, we're going to make it to the top.
For sure.
Well, I'm from Scotland, so I'm used to all 4 seasons and every day of all time of the year. So, and it only goes to 4,000 feet, and it's it can be crazy. Yeah, it can be crazy there too. Well, my wife's going to laugh when she listens to this bit here because I'm a little kind of weather geek, and I have a little man crush on Chris Toma. So she's going to laugh when she hears that you're friends with Chris
Well,
Toma.
my first book, I'll have to send it to you guys. It's Sleeping on the Summits. I brought Chris in to co-author that with me.
Okay.
That's cool.
Now it's in its 4th edition because I was published in 2012. So in 13 years, it's sold out three times.
Is he still on Channel 2 or whatever it is that he does?
He's now with Weather Nation.
He's with Weather Nation now.
And he does mountain weather forecasting as a side business. I've referred him a lot of clients over the years. And because of all our friendship, partnership, we went to college together. Yeah, he does my forecasts for free, which is really awesome.
That's cool. So no,
Lisa's
going to laugh a lot when I tell her about this. But
yeah.
So your PhD focuses on weather and climate. I'm really a sports guy, but back in the day when I went to school, you had to do a secondary subject, and I did geography. That was kind of my kind of thing. So how does your sort of knowledge on weather and climate and that influence your decision making in the mountains?
Well, I think studying a lot of trends helps a lot. And then when you get a forecast, you're out there and I nerd out on like what the conditions are doing. Like the other day was a good example. It was like, well, I was up on Mount Yale and the winds were kind of coming out of the southwest. And this was before the approach of an oncoming storm. And the reason for the southwest or south flow is because low pressure has a counterclockwise rotation around its center in general. And so we knew that front was coming from the west because of that spin and the southwesterly winds that day. And when it's cool when you study it on like a weather map or on these models, and then you go out and you see it. And then there's just a lot of other general things, So, when you study it in the lab, you go out there, you see it, you experience it, then you learn from it. And then the next time when there's more weather being predicted, it's sometimes you're out there and you can predict stuff by feeling what the conditions are. And
so have you got a real life example of a time when that knowledge actually saved your life? It's a bit dramatic, or your team's, but where it really made a big decision, you suddenly went, oh, this is not what we expected, but I understand this is what's happening, so that means I should do this.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few times on Aconcagua where that mountain can get crowded. And one year we had I took 4 guys up there, and while we were acclimating, touching some of the higher camps and then coming down, the winds would get really bad when we were in base camp and the mountain was no good, and that was fine. And it made our clients nervous. But then you also know there that the storm systems come off the ocean. You're pretty close to the ocean there, and it's a westerly wind as well. And prior to the summit, then we got stuck in base camp for like 4 days. And while we were doing rotations before that, no one summited for like 10 days. So no one had summited for like 2 weeks. And that's another sort of thing of keeping together is first of all, I like to try to keep my guys separate from all these people that are there, because people will say anything. Oh, well, so-and-so said this about the weather and it means, no, we can't go up, and this and this and this. And just people talk, and it's not, usually it's not positive. It should be, but it's not.
Yeah.
So you try to get your clients to avoid that. But I also knew that one of the days was going to be pretty windy, in particular, a forecast that Chris sent me. And he sent me like a chart of like a low that was coming off the ocean. There was like a little bit of maybe a 36-hour window where, it was going to be windy up top. But if this sort of offshore low pressure system kind of wobbled, like it looked like it might, based on the buckle and the jet stream, that it was going to give us about 36 hours to where the winds might get lower than 30 miles per hour. And so the cool thing is my clients were so acclimated that I was able to get them to skip camp. So we did like a 1 push, 1 long day, leaving at 6 a.m. all the way up to the high camp. And then we got them up to the high camp. And so then the next morning we could leave at 3 a.m. and go summit by like 10 a.m. and then get them down. And it was a gamble. But we were going to at least go try to get to the high camp. And if we got to the high camp, and Chris was sending me at the time on the InReach, he was sending me just new updates. Basically, we get to the high camp, and if it wasn't blowing at 40 or 50 miles an hour, then we kind of knew that this buckle in the jet stream had occurred, and that was going to hold the low back just enough so we could go summit, come down, and go back to base camp in that window. And after that, the window was going to close, and it was going to be bad again for like 5 days. So we leave base camp. all these people are wondering, why are these people leaving? But also our team was strong. Most people, when they climb Aconcagua, go like camp 1, camp 2, camp 3. We did a direct push to camp 3.
Nice.
Took like about 6 hours longer than that day than normal, just because you're not just going to camp 1 or 2. But you had to be able to do it in that style. If you had to go sleep in one camp, the next camp, you would not have made it. The window was going to close. So I was able to take advantage of strong clients, a little bit of weather knowledge, and get them up and down. We got back to base camp, and then no one summited again for like 7 days. We were the only team in like a 20-day stretch that year that made it to the top.
Wow.
And I got my clients in and out of there in 10 days, and they were super stoked.
Yeah, sure.
So there's been some times where you see something and you just go with it and see.
Yeah.
And you can always turn around too. Like that was well, if we have to turn around and go back to base camp, we used up some energy, but we're going to end up sitting back in base camp again for like 5 days. So what does it matter?
You have time to recover.
And we'll get more acclimated anyway by touching high again.
For sure.
Yeah. So I always try to see the benefits to these choices.
Right.
And again, that goes back to this Everest-Ready framework. Like, hey, are we ready to go? Are we ready to just go up there and try it and see and have an open mind about it?
Yeah. What do you think people most get wrong with risk assessment? Is it listening to the wrong people? Is it the false sense of security that we talked about earlier? In the mountains and in life, like, what do you think people most of the time get wrong about that?
I think now sometimes with social media, like people take more risks because they want to get the shot.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of always pretending that the cameras aren't around and nobody cares. And are you doing it for the right reasons? And then on the other side, I do think that some guides underestimate their clients or overestimate them. Maybe they think that they're stronger than they are, or they don't plan for certain things. And then the weirdest thing with risk management on high mountains is human nature. So what I mean by that is, okay, you're on a mountain, it's cold out. You have to get you have to, I love sunrise summits, but you have to get up really early to get one. So if you're not leaving at on certain mountains, like at midnight or 1 a.m., you're not making to the top for sunrise, and it's the best time to be up there anyway. So then you can get down quick, and all of a sudden you're down and you're out of the danger zone. You're out of harm's way. You're out of any storms that can develop. And it just boggles my mind on most of these peaks that we're up and down this thing. We're coming down, and it's like 5 hours later, and people are just coming up. And I'm like, okay, not every day is a bad weather day. Maybe the day's good the whole day. Great, you're fine. Then go up and do your summit. It's great. But you avoid crowds if you go early. You avoid the potential for storms later. All the risk of that is lower. And I still don't understand either companies, guides, people that aren't guided, the mentality behind sort of no sense of urgency in big mountains. I think you always got to have a sense of urgency. Otherwise, that's the easiest way to get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you were getting at the business stuff too as well there. I think that's the same in business though.
Yeah.
Lauren actually gets up earlier than I do, but we are like get up early. I'm usually on my computer by 6:30. You're probably by 6, are you? A bit earlier?
Well, these days.
I know you're having a baby. Usually you are. We're kind of, and the work I get done from that 6 to 8 is much more than I would get done if I did 10 or 12.
Yeah.
I just absolutely hammer it at that time of day. I feel very focused. So I think that rolls into life as well.
Yeah, a life of leisure, a life of purpose, right? You have to just decide how important things are to you, I think. In some ways, and that makes perfect sense. Well, I want to talk about actually your foundation. You have the Everest Foundation. The NOD, is that what it's?
Yeah, so the NOD just comes from like a group of friends in high school. We all played football, basketball, baseball. We won conference championships. We just had a good group of guys. We didn't drink alcohol as high school kids. We just stayed out of trouble. We just got together and practiced sports, went to camps together, played football, played basketball. And at the time, as a joke, we called ourselves the nation, the NOD, the Nation of Domination, which is like kind of.
I was wondering what it stood for.
But we changed it to NOD, which is no off days, meaning like literally, if you're not working hard in a sport or in life, somebody somewhere else is, and when you meet them, they're going to beat you because they've been working hard. And that was that drove us that time. So so I created my company, at right out of college called the NOD Enterprises, and it's just a LLC, entrepreneur type company. And through that, we created the NOD Everest Foundation, which is a nonprofit. And the basis of it is to help the youth in our valley here in the Vail Valley through a basketball camp. And this summer is our 20th annual basketball camp for Eagle Valley High School, where I went to high school. We have donors, we have sponsors. We raise a fair amount of money to give back to the high schools through the camp and through our donors and sponsors. And then we put money towards a $1,000 or $2,000 scholarship every year to a high school graduating senior. That's on my website too. And people apply, students at the school apply for that. And then we take the pool of the applicants and our board votes on it. And we pick a winner, and then they get into about this time of year with their college career. Like if they've gotten the scholarship for their first year, and we ask them, hey, 2 requirements. 1, you should reapply, write us just a brief letter as to why you deserve the money again for a second year. We make it renewable for 4 years if they need it. And then we'd like you to come and visit us at our basketball camp and just spend a day with our kids at the camp. We do mainly 3rd through 9th grade or so, but we also have high school kids that come to the camp sometimes and volunteer and work and coach and play and whatnot. And then we expanded that camp 5 years ago to Battle Mountain High School in a partnership with the Mountain Rec District in the Valley. And so, yeah, those have been the first 2 initiatives that we've been sort of the common initiatives of our small nonprofit. But then whenever there's been a crisis or something going on, for example, during COVID, both in Pakistan and Nepal for a year, like the world was shut down. And in these other countries, it's not like people had like the pandemic assistance relief that we had.
Yeah, no one was sending them checks.
That was insane, man, getting like $600 a week checks from the government when it was COVID time or whatever. But these other countries, if these guys can't work, because people weren't traveling there, that year 2020 was very difficult for a lot of these families and groups, and even the guys that work for me. And so through just some crowdsourcing and through the internet and through a lot of my clients and whatnot, we went to Pakistan for one trip and we went to Nepal for another trip. And in both trips, I was just literally through social media and crowdfunding on both of the trips, raised about 25,000 in both cases. And we literally just gave cash to mainly workers that supported our company that weren't working the year before. So we got there, we had small groups that we were able to convince in 2021 when there were still restrictions that, hey, there was no quarantine. You can still come and hike, you can still come to Nepal or to Pakistan. And we went to those places and we climbed, we had enough of a program similar to what I'm doing now almost every year. And we just visited a lot of a lot of these guys that work for me have become my dear friends. We visited their homes. We, literally gave them, here's $1,000 to help you, or here we paid them double. We said, well, hey, we'll match your last year's salary for what you did on a normal job for me. And basically took all those funds and just gave them to where they needed to go and helped.
Yeah, there's a lot of, seems like there's a lot of stuff happening up in the valley. I think I've supported Chris Anthony's youth project. I'm sure you know Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Up in the mountains. I've done some stuff. I've been to a couple of his events too. So
nice.
there's a lot of you working with young athletes and aspiring adventurers. So if there was one thing you wish you could install in everyone you mentor, and people who are listening here who are inspired by your story, what would you want to instill?
I think it's never too late to go for your dream, to do whatever you want to do. You could be like 70 years old, or you could be 17. And like, if you have a goal or a dream, like write it down, share it with a dear friend, share it with someone you trust, and then implement a plan and just go for it. Like, I think there's so many people in this world that are scared of what other people think. And so if we can somehow erase that thought or feeling in people, I think more people would just actually go for it and do it, and always say yes. If someone comes to you and asks you to do something crazy and outrageous, and maybe it's something that you think could be a little bit scary, you should just do it. You should just say yes, and then you'll figure it out.
It's quite interesting you say that, John, because there's a little anti-go for your dream in the podcast world right now. People like Scott Galloway and people like this are talking about go for what you're talented at. Don't go for your dream. Because too many people are failing. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of had a dream to climb Mount Everest, and then I had no idea that I mean, look, the first time I did Everest in 2012, I slapped about 12 grand on my credit card because I was short. I couldn't even afford to go. But I was like, you know what if I don't go? I'm going to always wonder. And then I was like, well, I have some cash. I'll figure it out later. And then even after that time, I mean, because the first summit I did, I got turned away from the summit 500 feet from the summit because of a bad storm. 7 people died that night. We went back to base camp, and then I was able to muster up the courage and the energy to skip 2 camps and go back up and summit. And then that decision changed my life, because when I got down, Dateline NBC called me, and they made a documentary about that climb called Into the Death Zone.
So this is the bit that he's never been close to death.
Right.
So now I was 500 feet from where 7 people died, but I've never been close to any death.
Crazy blowing, but like, it was more about the fact that I got back to base camp and I was more scared of failing, and I was more scared of, well, now if I go home and I didn't summit this mountain, what am I going to do? Like, I already invested this extra money. My credit cards ran into the ground. I'm going to go home and I'm going to have this problem. Well, if I go summit, I have no idea if that's going to help me or not. It probably will. But at the same time, like, I got nothing to lose. I already lost everything. And so when I went back up, skipped 2 camps because we had to make a weather window, was very lucky to climb with one of our Sherpa Sirdars, who I couldn't afford a personal Sherpa, but this guy Jangbu, who was overseeing these sort of members that were part of this group that I bought a permit with, he went back up to check on them. They had Sherpas, whatever, and they all climbed. And he came to me before we went back up, and he said, hey, what are you going to do? Do you want to go back up? And he's like, I'm going to go back up. Do you want to climb with me? And I was sort of like, well, I can't afford you because I didn't pay for a Sherpa. But second of all, yeah, sure, I'll go back up, because it's like this guy who summited Everest 12 times. It'd be like if LeBron James asked you to play horse, would you say no?
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I'm going to go climb with this guy. So we skipped 2 camps and made it to the summit, and it was dead calm winds. We had great weather, and that changed the trajectory of my life, because I got home and I did it, but then that allowed me to open up doors for, like, my book came out, and then I got, started getting hired to speak, and then that documentary, and then even into 2015 after the earthquake, though that was a failure, and I came home. Heck, I drove Uber for 2 years, because in between being sort of a ski bum, being a college professor at Colorado Mountain College, I could go make an extra 2 or 3 grand a month and improve my situation. And in the Vail Valley, I have a business card. I have a book. I have, I give somebody a business card. It's got me on the summit of Everest on the back of the card. It's got the names of my books. People get curious. They see my website. Yeah. Those are all situations I could control. And so they get curious. And heck, I had a guy get my ride one night, and I took him into Vail, and he was the CEO of Charles Schwab, and he hired me for a $25,000 speech.
Oh.
And so at the time, because I was still trying to figure out how to run a business, I failed a lot in that. And I was like, well, at least I can control, like, I always have money. I always have extra money. Yeah. I was in debt. I got rid of all my debt. I, drove for almost 3 years off and on. Like, when I had time in the side, I would, on a quiet night, like after teaching class from 3 to 6 at CMC, I'd get in the car with my papers. I'd grade papers. Then I'd take like a quick hit, take a ride somewhere. Okay, now 10-minute break. I'm sitting there. Another ride comes in. I drive them. I'd finished all grading my papers. I would have been home grading papers anyway for the night. Mm-hmm. Got that done. Drove for 3 hours. Made $300. Like, and people were tipping. Yeah. People were getting curious. I was really good at it because I didn't even need to look at the map in the app. I would just drive and take someone. Oh, you need to go to the Splendido in Beaver Creek. Okay, cool. I already know where that is. I'd drive them up there, and then they'd say, oh, well, hey, we'll tip you extra if you come back and pick us up later tonight. So it was just an amazing little gig, but it was just that hustle and that desire to improve my situation. And I think if we all have that in us, like, you're always going to be successful if you never give up on that.
Yeah. What do you have any projects coming up?
Yeah.
What's one that you're really excited about?
So while I have been guiding a ton since 2019, the last time I did my own project was 2019, where it wasn't me guiding any clients. It was me. I went to Manaslu in Nepal and skied part of the mountain, but it was mainly to climb the mountain without oxygen. It's one of our 8,000 meter peaks, and I was able to make it to the top without supplemental oxygen. And because that was furthering sort of my progression and eventually summiting Everest without oxygen. because I know it's possible for me. But since that time, COVID hit. I was training, Mike, Devon, other clients for Everest and for guiding, the 7 summits, and I was just kind of working and grinding away. And I put out a book in 2022, a hiking guide book. But really, since that time, I haven't done my own. So this summer, I'm setting aside 3 months, starting at the end of July. And a dear friend of mine, Mike, who I took up Everest in 2021, is going to join me. And we're going to hike the Continental Divide Trail, which goes from Glacier National Park in Canada through 5 states. Comes through here in Colorado as well, from Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico to the Mexican border. We're going to hike 3,000 miles in 90 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're going to see what's possible.
Maybe I'd drive that. I don't know.
I'm not even sure I'd drive it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I think I'd prefer to hike it, actually.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Well,
so that's my big thing this year.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
So one final question before we wrap up. Ask our wrap-up question, I should say. If we had to summarize everything, you've gone through and just all the experiences you've had and the biggest lessons, what's the biggest lesson that you think applies to everyday life that you could share with other people that you just think is something that everyone needs to know about?
I think similar to before, it's taking something that it's going to be hard and going for it. And obviously that's kind of superficial. It's just like, yeah, just go for it. But it's actually settling into the journey behind that and really defining what is your why. Why are you doing this? But also it's if it's a long-term goal, you can't get just fixated on the summit. You have to settle and enjoy the journey, and you have to come to terms with the fact that it is going to be hard. I love doing cold plunges. When I get in at first sometimes and my mind's not right, once I come to grips with the fact that, yes, it's going to be cold, but so what? It's the same sort of mentality with like a big goal or a dream that you're putting off. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, you're going to have to work for it. Well, so what? Like, come to terms with it and go for it. Like, what do you have to lose? Yeah. And so it is about the journey to get there and really enjoying that journey.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really, really fascinating. And one of the things we like to do at the end of our podcast is all about strength. And I think you could fairly safely say you've shown a lot of strength. You've given us some unique perspective about, high altitude climbing and mindset, etc. We're all about kindness too, though. So is there somebody who kind of embodies these values for you, someone who deeply influenced or inspired you, that you just want to give a leg up, give a shout out to? Be great to hear who mentored you.
Well, somebody that was my dear mentor, he's actually no longer with us. His name's John Fielder. And you may be familiar with John. He wrote like 40 different books on Colorado, and he's an incredible, famous photographer in Colorado. He was my mentor. He wrote the foreword of my first book, and he passed away about 1.5 years ago of pancreatic cancer. And I was with him almost near to the end. He got weaker and weaker and weaker. He used to drive over to Vail and ski with me even while he was ailing. And each time he came over, it became less and less able to ski. Like he'd maybe come over, do 5 runs, and he'd come over, do 3 runs. One time he came over, did 1 run. And then, I had to drive him back to his house. Like it was really devastating watching a man who was so strong and so inspiring to so many people just start to fall apart because of cancer. And he inspired me because one of the last things he said to me was, you have to do as much as you can for as long as you can. And you have to just go all in, because when it's over, it's over.
Yeah.
And I just think that stuck with me, because one of the last times I took him back to his house, this was a man that did everything. And, and he taught me everything I know about photography and the book business. And I've written 4 books. I'm getting kind of emotional, but he gave me his skis after, his family gave them to me after he passed away. I skied on his skis today. You just have to do as much as you can for as long as you can and not look back.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.